It began as an ordinary morning at Balmoral Castle, mist curling around the old stone towers, and the air thick with that peculiar royal silence. But when King Charles noticed a single envelope resting atop his desk, one that bore his late mother's handwriting and the haunting words, "Do not read," something inside him shifted, his hands trembled, his breath caught. The guards outside heard the chair scrape the floor. What secret could possibly be so dangerous, even for a king to know? If stories like this leave you as breathless as the royal guards themselves, don't forget to tap that like button. It helps more royal watchers find our channel. Subscribe for more untold moments from inside the palaces, where loyalty, love, and legacy collide. And hey, share this one with someone who believes the crown hides no secrets. They might just think twice after hearing this. The Scottish Highlands were wrapped in a quiet mist that morning, the kind that drifts low over the heather and makes even the sound of footsteps feel sacred. Balmoral Castle, with its gray stone walls and silent corridors, carried a weight heavier than time itself. Inside, King Charles sat alone at his oak desk, the fire barely alive in the grate. He had risen early, as he often did since his mother's passing. Grief, he found, wasn't something that faded. It merely changed shape. Sometimes it came as silence, sometimes as a whisper when he least expected it. But that morning, grief came as an envelope. It lay there, centered perfectly on the polished desk. Cream paper, royal seal, a faint, familiar scent of lavender and parchment. But it was the handwriting that froze him, the unmistakable, looping script of Queen Elizabeth II, his mother's handwriting. And beneath the royal seal, written in her own steady hand, were 3 chilling words: "Do not read." Charles's pulse quickened. He glanced around the room as though someone might step out of the shadows to explain. But there was only silence. The kind that pressed against your chest until breathing became a task. For a long moment, he simply stared at the letter. It shouldn't be here. Every personal document of the late queen had been catalogued, archived, sealed by royal protocol. So why this one? Now, months after her passing, on his desk. A quiet knock broke the stillness. "Your Majesty?" came a voice from behind the door. It was Captain Harris, one of the senior royal guards, a man Charles had known since his days as Prince of Wales. Loyal, steady, unflinching. "Yes, come in," Charles said, his tone low, careful. The guard stepped in, saluted slightly, and paused when he noticed the envelope. His eyes flickered with something Charles didn't miss: recognition. "You've seen this before," Charles said softly. Harris hesitated. "I might have, sir." Charles turned toward him, the letter still unopened in his hand. "Explain." "Sir," the guard began carefully, "Her Majesty instructed that if this letter ever surfaced, it was to be placed in your possession directly. She didn't want the courtiers or the secretaries involved." Charles frowned. "Why not?" "I wasn't told, sir," Harris said, his voice quieter now. "Only that it was written in her final weeks at Balmoral. She was different then, thoughtful, heavy-hearted." The king swallowed hard. "Did she say what was inside?" The guard's eyes dropped to the floor. "No, sir. Only that you would understand when the time came." Charles turned the envelope over in his trembling hands. The seal, still intact, seemed to mock him. "Do not read." Was it a warning? A plea? A test of loyalty? He remembered her final days vividly. The soft light through the Balmoral curtains, the quiet conversations by her bedside. Even then, she had carried an air of mystery, as though some part of her mind was still working through the unfinished business of a reign that spanned generations.
Harris hesitated.
The letter felt warm in his palm, though he couldn't say why. He sat down slowly, running his thumb along the edge of the paper,
urging the king not to open it. When the door closed, the castle fell back into its ghostly quiet. Only the sound of the wind outside filled the room, a low, mournful hum that seemed to echo through the corridors of history. Charles took a deep breath. "Do not read." He reached for his letter opener and paused. What if it was something she never wanted him to know? something that would change how he remembered her, or himself. He thought of his mother's eyes, sharp, yet endlessly kind, the way she could look at a person and see everything they were hiding. She had always believed in duty above all else. But this felt personal, almost human. He slid the blade under the seal. The wax cracked softly, the sound of a secret finally exhaling. Inside, a folded note, short, handwritten, the same lavender ink she always used. His eyes scanned the first line, and his heart nearly stopped. My dearest Charles, if you are reading this, then something I feared has already come pass. He froze. The next words were smudged slightly, as though her hand had trembled while writing. There is truth within the family that has been buried too long. It concerns your future, and the promise I made long before you were born. Charles blinked rapidly. His vision blurred, not from tears, not yet, but from disbelief. A promise? Before he was born? He read on. I have trusted few with what I am about to confess. One of them still stands guard at Balmoral. He knows more than he will ever say aloud. But when you are ready, ask him about the night the crown was tested. He will understand. Charles's mouth went dry. He read the final line slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. My son, the throne is not just inherited. It is chosen, by deeds unseen, by the truths we dare not speak. Remember this, loyalty is not always silence. Signed simply, Elizabeth R. Charles let the paper fall to the desk. His hands trembled so violently he could barely steady them. The fire crackled. A clock ticked in the corner, each second stretching like an eternity. He sat back, staring at the words, the night the crown was tested. What could that mean? A failed coup? A family betrayal? Or something deeper, something even history had hidden? He looked toward the window where the royal guard stood stationed under the gray sky. One of them, Harris, was staring straight ahead, expression unreadable. For the first time in his life, Charles felt the weight of not just a crown, but of ghosts. He folded the letter gently, returned it to the envelope, and pressed the seal shut with his thumb. Tomorrow, he decided, he would summon Captain Harris again. And when he did, he would ask about that night, the night his mother had written about. But for now, he simply sat there, the flames reflecting in his eyes, whispering a single question to the silence of Balmoral. What did you keep from me, mother? The next morning broke cold and pale over Balmoral. The mist hadn't lifted. It clung to the castle like an old secret refusing to leave. King Charles stood by the window, the unopened curtains filtering the light into a soft gray glow. He had barely slept. The letter sat before him again, no longer sealed, yet somehow heavier than before. He had read it a dozen times in the night. Each word carried a new meaning, as if the ink itself changed under the weight of dawn. The night the crown was tested. A promise I made long before you were born. Those phrases repeated in his head, like an echo he couldn't silence. By mid-morning, Charles ordered Captain Harris to his private study. The guard arrived promptly, posture perfect, expression unreadable. Yet when he entered, Charles noticed a flicker, a shadow of something like guilt. Close the door, Harris, Charles said quietly. The captain obeyed, his gloved hands clasped behind his back. You told me yesterday, Charles began, that my mother instructed you to deliver that letter only to me. You've kept her confidence all this time. Yes, your majesty. There's more to it, isn't there? Charles's tone was steady but edged with something dangerous. Curiosity mixed with dread. You knew about this night the crown was tested. Harris didn't respond. His jaw tensed. I'm not asking as your king, Charles continued softly. I'm asking as her son. That seemed to strike something in the guard. He inhaled deeply, his voice lower now. Your Majesty, the night she mentioned, it wasn't a ceremony or a scandal. It was something else. Charles leaned forward. Go on. Harris hesitated, eyes flicking toward the letter on the desk. It was during her final stay here at Balmoral, nearly a year before her passing. She summoned only a handful of us. 3 guards, 1 secretary, and a man who wasn't from the palace. Charles frowned. Wasn't from the palace? A civilian, elderly, frail, but she treated him with a respect I'd never seen before. She called him Sir Michael, though none of U.S. could find a record of any living knight by that name. They spoke alone for hours. That night, I stood outside her study until dawn. Charles's pulse quickened, and afterward, the next morning, she ordered the castle sealed. No visitors, no staff beyond her chosen few. Later that week, she wrote the letter you hold now. She was changed, sir, not shaken, but resolved, like she had finally made peace with something that had haunted her for decades. The king walked toward the window, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. You're telling me my mother met with a man no one could identify, and wrote that letter the same night? Yes, sir. Charles turned slowly. And what was this test she spoke of? What happened that night? Harris swallowed hard. His usual composure faltered. Permission to speak freely, sir. Granted. The guard lowered his voice. I believe it was about the line of succession. The air seemed to leave the room. Charles stared at him, disbelief freezing his face. Explain yourself. There were whispers, Harris said carefully, even within the royal household. Old stories about an agreement made in the early days of your mother's reign. A promise between her and someone powerful. Something to protect the monarchy at any cost. Charles shook his head slowly. You're saying the Queen, my mother, made a secret deal about the throne? Not a deal, Harris said. A safeguard, but one that may have come with a price. The silence that followed was thick, heavy enough to feel. Charles turned away, pressing his hands to the windowsill. The Highland wind rattled against the glass. I thought I knew her, he murmured. Every part of her life. Her duty, her devotion. I thought I understood it. Harris looked down, his voice softening. She carried burdens no one else could. Sir, she never spoke of that night again, not even to her closest advisers. Only that letter remained. Charles stared at the envelope once more. Do not read. It wasn't a warning against danger. It was a shield, protecting him from a truth he might not have been ready to bear. Sir Michael, Charles whispered, find everything you can about him. Every record, every mention. I want to know who he was, and why my mother trusted him. Yes, your majesty. Harris bowed slightly and turned to leave. But before he reached the door, Charles added quietly, And Harris, thank you. The guard paused. For what, sir? For your silence and your loyalty. My mother clearly trusted you. I suppose now I must too. When Harris left, Charles remained still, staring out at the gray expanse of Balmoral's grounds. The deer moved slowly across the wet grass, unaware that within those castle walls, a secret older than their very bloodline was stirring awake. As the day wore on, he retreated to the old library, his mother's sanctuary. The room still smelled faintly of her perfume and old books. He found himself drawn to her personal shelf, filled with journals, speeches, and correspondence. And there, tucked between two leather-bound volumes, was something that shouldn't have been there, a single sheet of parchment, yellow with age, bearing the same royal seal as a letter. He unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was different, older, less certain, but unmistakably hers. To be opened only in the event of truth unraveling the crown. Below that, a single line in ink that had faded almost to nothing. If my son must know, let him find the guard who stood watch the night I faced the truth. Charles's throat tightened. She had left him not one, but two clues, both pointing back to the same man. Captain Harris wasn't just a witness to her final days. He was part of the Queen's final secret. Outside, thunder rolled faintly across the hills. The rain began to fall against the ancient stone, and in the quiet hum of the castle, King Charles whispered to himself, not as a monarch, but as a son still chasing his mother's shadow. Mother, what truth were you so afraid would die with you? He turned back to the desk, the letter beside him, the candlelight flickering against his face. He could almost feel her presence, calm, patient, waiting. Tomorrow, he decided, he would summon Captain Harris again, but not for answers this time, for the truth. Because if the Queen's confession truly involved the night the crown was tested, then this was no longer just a family secret. It was a secret that could shake the entire monarchy. The rain hadn't stopped for 2 days. Balmoral's gray walls glistened with moisture, and the wind moved through the courtyards like a restless spirit. Inside, the halls were silent, save for the echo of boots on marble. Captain Harris, summoned once again to the king's private chamber. He knew why. The letter, the queen. That night, for decades, he'd kept the secret locked behind the same discipline that had kept the crown safe. But now, under Charles's gaze, he felt the years pressing against his chest. He was no longer just a guard. He was the last living witness to a truth even history dared not record. "Come in." Charles's voice called from within. The king stood beside the fireplace, his uniform immaculate but his expression strained. In his hand was the letter again, the one marked "Do Not Read." The edges were soft now from being handled too often, as though the weight of its words had worn through the paper. "Sit, Captain," the king said quietly. "It's time you tell me everything." Harris hesitated only a moment before removing his cap and sitting across from him. His posture was still proud, but his eyes betrayed the exhaustion of years. "Your Majesty," he began, "what I'm about to say, I've never spoken aloud to anyone, not even my wife." "Then start from the beginning," Charles said. Harris nodded. It was winter, a night unlike any I'd known. The Queen was here at Balmoral, though it wasn't on her public calendar. We were told it was a private retreat, just a few of us on duty, but I could sense something was different. She was restless, thoughtful. She'd been receiving letters, not from officials or family, but from someone she called a keeper. Charles frowned. "The keeper?" "Yes, sir. We didn't know who he was. No insignia, no title. But one evening he arrived, elderly, thin, eyes sharp as glass. The guards weren't permitted to search him. A direct order from Her Majesty. What happened then? She dismissed everyone except me, said she wanted no interruptions. I stood outside the door for nearly 5 hours. I could hear their voices, low at first, then raised, not angry, but emotional, like two people arguing over something sacred. Charles listened, motionless. At one point, Harris continued, the door opened just a crack. I saw her sitting at her desk, trembling. The man, the keeper, was holding out a box. Small, wooden, old. I heard her say, "It ends with me." He replied, "It never ends." And then the door shut again. The king's grip on the armrest tightened. When she came out hours later, Harris said, his tone softening, her eyes were red. She dismissed the keeper, told us he'd be escorted out before dawn. And then she turned to me. She said, "Captain, you'll serve with honor. I need you to remember this night. Not for the crown, but for my son." Charles's breath caught. She handed me the wooden box and said, "If one day he asks, tell him the truth. The crown he wears is built on a promise that must be paid in full." Then she locked herself in the chapel until morning. When she came out, she burned her private diary, the one she kept separate from the archives. Charles stared into the flames. "And the box?" Harris hesitated, then reached into his coat pocket. His hand trembled as he withdrew a small, aged object wrapped in cloth. He placed it gently on the table between them. The king didn't speak. He only unwrapped it slowly. Inside lay a box of dark mahogany, about the size of a folded letter. Etched along the top were words barely visible with age. For truth, not for glory. Charles's pulse pounded. "You've had this all these years?" "Yes, sir. I was sworn to guard it until you asked. And until now, I hoped you never would." Charles hesitated, then lifted the latch. Inside was a folded sheet of paper and a faded photograph. The photograph showed a young Elizabeth, not yet queen, standing beside a man in military uniform. Not her father, not Philip, someone else entirely. He turned it over. On the back, in her unmistakable hand, were the words, "The night I chose duty over love." Charles blinked, stunned. "Who is he?" Harris's eyes darkened. "Sir Michael, the man she called the keeper." Charles stared at the face in the photograph. A man perhaps in his 30s, eyes piercing, familiar in a way he couldn't explain. He was part of something called the Oath of the Crown, sir, Harris said quietly. A secret order that predates even your grandfather. Their role was to protect the monarchy, not from enemies abroad, but from within. Charles looked up sharply. From within? Yes, sir. From bloodlines, scandals, choices that can endanger the throne's legitimacy. Your mother discovered something about her own lineage, and she swore to keep her to secrecy. That was the night the crown was tested. The room felt smaller suddenly, the air heavy with history pressing down. Charles's voice cracked slightly. Are you telling me my mother questioned her own right to rule? Harris nodded slowly. She didn't doubt her duty, only the truth of what that duty cost. Charles leaned back, his expression unreadable. The rain outside had softened to a whisper, but the tension inside the room could shatter glass. He looked at the photograph again. The young woman, and it wasn't the queen the world knew. She was vulnerable, human, torn between love and crown. Why now? He whispered. Why reveal this to me after all these years? Harris looked at him steadily. Because, sir, she wanted you to lead with knowledge, not blind loyalty. She carried the burden of silence, so that one day you might not have to. The king nodded slowly, eyes distant. And the keeper, what became of him? Harris's gaze dropped. He died the following winter, but not before sending one last message, a sealed note addressed to the next heir of truth. It's inside the box, beneath the lining. Charles opened the compartment and found a smaller envelope. No royal seal, no name, only 3 words scrawled across it in faded ink. For the chosen one. He didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, he looked at Harris with quiet gratitude. You've carried this secret your entire life. My mother trusted you more than any advisor. I understand why now. Harris stood, saluted, and said softly, with respect, sir, she didn't just trust me. She trusted you to finish what she could not. The king nodded, emotion tightening his throat. Then I'll honor that trust. Whatever truth this letter holds, I'll face it, no matter the cost. As Harris turned to leave, lightning flashed through the window, illuminating the portrait of Queen Elizabeth above the mantel. Her painted eyes seemed to follow them, calm but watchful, as if approving the moment she'd long prepared for. When the door closed, Charles looked down once more at the small envelope marked for the chosen one. His fingers hovered over it. Not yet, he whispered. Not tonight. Because some truths, even for a king, require courage, and courage, he realized, was something that came only with the dawn. The castle slept beneath a sky of restless clouds. The storm had passed, but the air still carried its memory, heavy, electric, alive. In the king's private study, a single candle burned low, throwing a trembling glow across the letterbox that had haunted him for days. King Charles sat before it in silence. He hadn't moved for hours. The guards had changed shifts twice, but he hadn't noticed. His thoughts were far away, with his mother, with the crown, with the truths buried beneath centuries of loyalty. The small envelope marked for the chosen one lay in his palm. The paper felt fragile, like it might dissolve if he held it too tightly. He remembered the last time he saw her. Queen Elizabeth, weak but radiant, her hand resting gently on his. Promise me, she had whispered, when your time comes, lead with truth, not fear. He had thought it farewell. But now, he understood it was a command. Charles exhaled and broke the seal. Inside was a folded sheet of parchment. The ink faded but legible. The handwriting wasn't his mother's. It was older, rougher, a man's hand. It began simply, to the next heir of truth. If you are reading this, it means Her Majesty kept her promise. Charles's eyes moved quickly, heart pounding. What was hidden must one day be known. The crown was never meant to be the possession of blood, but the stewardship of conscience. The true power of the monarchy lies not in who inherits it, but in who protects it, even from itself. He paused, frowning. Even from itself. He read on. The late queen carried a truth that could have divided the realm. She was not born into unquestioned lineage. Her right to rule, though sanctioned by law, was tested by history, and found worthy not by birth but by grace. Charles blinked. The words sank into him like cold water. Her Majesty discovered records suggesting her grandfather, King George VI, may not have been the lawful successor by blood, but she chose silence, not for deceit, but for the stability of the nation. The people needed a symbol of unity, not another civil fracture. She carried that burden alone. He sat back, stunned. His mind raced through decades of history, portraits, ceremonies, and bloodlines. The monarchy, the very foundation of their identity, had been balanced on a truth quietly buried beneath duty. He read the last lines, his throat tight. Tell the people only when they are ready to understand that the monarchy is not sacred because of ancestry, but because of the service it demands. Let them know the queen was chosen not by lineage, but by love, and let that be her legacy. No signature, no date, just silence. Charles sat still for a long time. The fire in the hearth crackled faintly, its glow reflected in his eyes. He understood now. The night his mother met the keeper was the night she learned this truth, and decided to protect it, not out of pride, but love. She hadn't ruled for power. She had ruled to preserve faith. He stood slowly, moving toward the portrait above the fireplace, the same portrait that had watched over him all these years. The queen's painted expression seemed softer now, almost human. "I see it now," he whispered. "You carried the truth so we could carry the crown." He reached out and touched the frame, his hand trembling. For the first time in his reign, Charles felt not the weight of the crown, but the mercy of it. Behind him, the door opened quietly. It was Captain Harris. "Forgive the intrusion, sir," he said gently. "The dawn has broken." Charles turned, eyes glistening. "It's all right, Captain. I think I've been waiting for this dawn my whole life." Harris nodded slightly. "Did you find what you sought?" Charles looked at the letter once more, folded neatly in his hand. "Yes," he said softly. "And something more. I found her courage." He walked toward the window. The morning sun was rising over the hills, painting the mist in gold. It was the same view his mother had cherished, the same dawn she must have watched in silence after sealing that fateful letter. Harris stood quietly, as if sensing this was no moment for ceremony. "What will you do, sir?" he asked. Charles's gaze lingered on the horizon. "For now," he said, "nothing. The world is not ready for this truth. Not yet. But one day, when it can understand that the worth of a monarch is not measured in bloodlines but in service, then the truth will belong to them." He turned back to Harris, his voice steadier now. "Until then, we honor her, not for what she hid, but for what she protected." Harris bowed deeply. "Yes, Your Majesty." Charles smiled faintly. "You've served two sovereigns, Captain. Both kept secrets to preserve faith. You've done your duty with honor. Thank you." Harris hesitated. "And you, sir, what will you tell the people?" Charles's eyes softened. "The truth," he said, "just not all of it." He placed the envelope and photograph back into the box, locked it, and pressed his mother's old seal ring against it. A quiet gesture of closure. Then he turned to the portrait one last time. "Rest now, Mummy," he whispered. "Your secret is safe, and so is your legacy." Outside, the guards shifted their posts as the first sunlight bathed the castle walls. The flag above Balmoral fluttered to life, catching the morning wind. And in that quiet moment, King Charles allowed himself something rare, a single tear tracing down his cheek, not of sorrow but of understanding. For in that fragile balance between truth and duty, he finally grasped what it meant to be king, not to rule but to serve, not to inherit but to carry on. And as the dawn fully broke, spilling light across the highlands, the letter lay sealed once more, a silent reminder that even the mightiest crowns are held together not by gold, but by the hearts that bear their weight.